What's really going on behind the courtroom doors of YNW Melly's trial just when you thought the chaos couldn't get any worse? New details have surfaced that are turning this entire case on its head. Why did YNW Melly suddenly break his silence after months of keeping his mouth shut? Could it be that he knows something the rest of us don't, or is Hegest playing us all today? We dive into jaw-dropping revelations that have us entire internet buzzing. Is this just another desperate move to sway public opinion, or could it actually work in his favor? From secret phone calls to leaked footage, we've got it all. Buckle up, because what we're about to uncover will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Now, about this case, it's been one of the most polarizing stories in recent memory, but today, YNW Melly's Courtroom saga takes a shocking turn. For years we've watched the headlines, dissected the footage, and speculate about his involvement in one of the music industry's most explosive cases. Now, in a dramatic courtroom showdown, YNW Melly has finally broken his silence. Nitsu's a move no one saw coming, and it's sending shockwaves through his fan base, legal system, and the internet at large. But why now? What could Melly possibly have to say that's worth the risk of speaking out so late in the gaming? Perhaps most importantly, will his words change the course of this trial? To understand the gravity of this moment, let's rewind to where it all began. For years, YNW Melly's name has been synonymous with controversy. A rising star in the rap world, his melodic style and infectious hooks propelled him to fame. But even as his music climbed, Descartes' whispers of trouble began to surface. Rumors of strange relationships, vowed disputes over money, and a trail of mysterious incidents followed him. At first, it was easy to dismiss these rumors as the price of fame, after a levery artist deals with their share of gossip. But as the details became harder to ignore, a darker narrative started to unfold. The heart of the controversy listened the shocking charges brought against him, allegations that he was involved in deaths of two close associates in Woovie and YW Sockheiser. The music world was stunned when news broke that Melly was a suspect. The details were murky at first, with conflicting reports about what actually happened that fateful night. Some claimed it was a drive-by shooting gone wrong, while others pointed to internal disputes within the YNW Crows. The dust settled the accusation. Against Melly became harder to brush aside. He was eventually arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. For fans, the arrest was a good punch. Melly's music had become the soundtrack to their lives, and the idea that their idol might be connected to a horrific crime was unthinkable. But as the trial date approached, the story took an even darker turn. Prosecutors painted a picture of a troubled artist driven by greed and paranoia, someone who saw his close friends as threats rather than allies. They claimed Melly was motivated by money, specifically a desire to keep more of the group's earnings for himself. According to this narrative, the murders weren't random acts of violence. They were calculated moves to eliminate perceived rivals. But Melly's defense told a very different story. They argued that he was being unfairly targeted, that there was no concrete evidence linking him to the crime. They pointed to his young age, his difficult upbringing, and his emotional struggles, presenting him as a scapegoat in a case filled with inconsistencies. For every damning piece of evidence brought forward by the prosecution, the defense found a counterpoint: witnesses who recounted their statements, questionable forensic results, and the lack of a clear motive made the case more complex than anyone had anticipated. And then there's that courtroom drama itself, a spectacle that baited the public like a gripping courtroom thriller, with cameras rolling and reporters scrambling for every piece of information. Melly's trial has been as much about optics as it has been about justice. His appearances in court have been dissected endlessly. His body language, his facial expressions, and even his choice of clothing have been analyzed for clues of raised eyebrow. Every subtle smirk has been turned into a meme, further fueling the firestorm of speculation. the legal proceedings have been anything but straightforward delays motions and heated exchanges between the lawyer shave turned this case into a drawn-out battle. At times, it's felt less like atrial and more like a high-stakes game of twos, with each side carefully plotting their next move, and throughout it all Melly has remained largely silent, his demeanor unreadable. Some have interpreted his silence as guilt, while others see it as a sign of confidence, a belief that the truth will ultimately come to light. As the trial has dragged on, the public has been left in a state of limbo. Was Melly the mastermind behind a cold-blooded crime, or is he the victim of a flawed system eager to make an example out of him? The evidence has been pieced together like a jigsaw puzzle, with each new revelation adding another layer of complexity. Ballistic reports, GPS data, and testimony from associate shave all been scrutinized in an attempt to unravel the truth. But no matter how much information has come to light, one question has remained unanswered. What does YNW Melly have to say about all of this? This question lingered for years while his fans demanded answers and his critics demanded accountability. Melly stayed silent. He refused to address the allegations and interviews, stayed off social media for extended periods, and let his lawyers do the talking. That is soon till now. With the trial at a critical juncture and public interest at an all-time high, Melly finally decided to speak. His statement delivered in court was brief but impactful. It wasn't the full confession that some had hoped for, nor was it a passionate denial of guilt. Instead, it was something far more cryptic, a statement that raised more questions than it answered. And that's where we find ourselves now. YNW Melly has broken his silence, and the world is left wondering to decipher what its means. Was it a calculated move to sway the jury, a desperate attempt to clear his name, or simply the words of someone who's been through years of turmoil finally reacting? A breaking point as we move into the next phase of this trial. One thing is clear: YNW Melly's story is far from over. The courtroom drama, the public intrigue, and the ongoing battle for the truth have only just begun. The weight of YNW Melly's cryptic courtroom statement left everyone reeling, but it wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. His tone was steady, yet his voice cracked at times. As if holding back a tidal wave of emotions, the courtroom fell silent. Even the judge, typically unfazed by dramatic displays, leaned in slightly, perhaps expecting more. But Melly's words, though few, were carefully chosen, and they set the stage for what was to come next. As the trial continued, the prosecution doubled down on their accusations. They presented new evidence that they claimed was undeniable: forensic reports, phone records, and a series of text messages allegedly sent by Melly in the hours leading up to the crime. The phone data pulled from both his and his alleged accomplices' devices painted a killing timeline. Prosecutors alleged Melly's movements were consistent with someone orchestrating an ambush. They argued that his messages hinted at a brewing conflict, cryptic texts that in hindsight seemed to foreshadow the tragic events that unfolded that night. On the other hand, the defense fired back with their own narrative. They highlighted gaps in the timeline and questioned the reliability of the forensic evidence. For instance, they pointed out discrepancies in the ballistic tests and challenged the chain of custody for certain key pieces of evidence. One defense attorney noted that prosecutors were relying heavily on circumstantial evidence, arguing you didn't convict a man based on maybe, convict based on proof, and there is no clear proof that my client is guilty. Meanwhile, witnesses were called to testify. Some were former associates of Melly, individuals who knew the dynamics within the YNW crew. They described their relationship between Melly, Sakshasar, and Juvie as complicated, brotherly, one moment tense, the next. According to one witness, the trio often clashed over money and creative direction, but the sea disputes never escalated beyond heated arguments. They were like family. The witness testified, "Yeah, they fought, but it was never something I thought would lead to this." However, another witness, Omion, described as a close confidant of Sackhazer, painted a different picture. They claimed that tensions had been building for months, fueled by financial disagreements, Sackhazer. Waste one calling the shots, and Melly didn't like that they said he felt like was doing all the work, making all the hits, and not getting his fair share. The prosecution seized on this testimony, arguing that it provided a clear motive, but the defense dismissed it as hearsay, emphasizing that no direct evidence linked Melly to the scene of the crime. Outside the courtroom, the public watched trial unfold like a high-stakes drama. Social media platforms were flooded with hashtags, and debates fans stood by, Melly arguing that he was being set up by the system, while others expressed outrage convinced of his guilt. Influencers, bloggers, and even celebrities weighed in, sharing their theories and speculations. Media frenzy was unlike anything Thirlwell tweet. Read, "It's hard to believe Melly did this. The guy I met at his show was humble, funny, and real. This ain't the dude they're making him out to be." Another user countered, "Money changed people, fame changes people. I'm not surprised if he snapped under all that pressure." Even within the music industry, opinions were divided. Some artists voiced their support for Melly, posting asterisk messages like "Free Melly" and sharing clips of his older performances. Others remained silent, unwilling to align themselves with a case that had become so controversial. Still, the trial had undeniably become a cultural flush in raising broader questions about fame, loyalty, and the price of success. Just as half public thought they had heard it all, a new twist emerged in the courtroom. A sealed document previously unavailable to either side was suddenly entered into evidence. The document reportedly a series of emails and phone suggested that someone had been manipulating witnesses behind the scenes. While the prosecution claimed this further implicated Melly, the defense asserted that it introduced reasonable doubts. If these witnesses were coerced, how can their testimony be trusted? The defense attorney asked. The room buzzed with murmurs as the judge reviewed the evidence, knowing it could shift the balance of the case. The defense team then pivoted, focusing on Melly's mental state. They presented medical records and expert testimony suggesting that had been dealing with severe anxiety and depression. A psychiatrist took the stand, explaining that Melly's behavior, his silence, his outbursts, his cryptic comments could all be symptoms of someone under extreme psychological stress. "We're not saying he's innocent because of his mental health," the psychiatrist clarified. "We're saying it's a factor to consider when understanding his actions and his words." By the end of the session, the courtroom was a whirlwind of emotions. The prosecution, bolstered by their new evidence, seemed more confident than ever. The defense, however, had managed to sow seeds about challenging the credibility of witnesses and the integrity of the investigation. The jury, visibly tired yet captivated, would have to weigh both sides carefully as the gavel fell and the session adjourned. Everyone knew that then next day's proceedings would be critical. It was clear that the trial had reached a boiling point. The narrative had shifted from a straightforward murder case to a battle over evidence, motives, and credibility. And with Melly now speaking out, the stakes had never been higher. What would he reveal next? What more could the prosecution uncover? The courtroom drama was far from over, and the next chapter promised to be even more explosive. With the courtroom still reeling from the previous day's bombshell evidence, everyone knew that the session would bring the trial's most pivotal moments. Both sides had delivered their best arguments and truest new twists, and left the jury with more questions than answers. The tension in the room was palpable as YNW Melly's defense prepared to counter the prosecution's latest evidence, including these controversial sealed documents and the testimony about witness coercion. As proceedings resumed, all eyes were on Melly. What would his next move be? Would remain cryptic, or would he find light on the murky details surrounding the case? With the stakes higher than ever, Melly's legal team said they had to pull out all the stops if they were going to tip the scales in his favor. The defense team began dismantling the prosecution's timeline. They pointed out inconsistencies between witness statements, GPS data, and forensic reports. One of their key arguments focused on the ballistic evidence. They called an independent expert to tested, who claimed that the trajectory analysis used by the prosecution was flawed. The angles don't match the prosecution's story, the expert testified. We follow the prosecution's theorized shooter would have had to be positioned outside the vehicle. But the evidence clearly shows that the shots came from inside the car from Sumian seated in the back. Left. The defense then highlighted the lack of a murder weapon. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defense attorney said, addressing the court with measured confidence, heard the prosecution's claims. You've seen the evidence they've brought forward, but there's one glaring hole in their case. The alleged murder weapon has never been recovered. Without it, their story is incomplete. How can we ascertain of who pulled the trigger if we didn't even know what weapon was used? Next, they moved to undermine the credibility of key witnesses. Several individuals who initially testified against Melly had since recanted their statements. The defense played audio recordings of these witnesses. Some of them admitted they were pressured into testifying a certain way. Others revealed thought they had been offered deals or asterisks threatened with charges of their own if they didn't cooperate. This is not justice. The defense attorney said, this is manipulation, and it casts a dark shadow over this entire case. Finally, the defense turned its attention back to Melly's state of mind and personal background. They painted a picture of a young man who had risen from difficult circumstances, faced immense pressure as a rising star in the music industry, and found himself caught in a web of accusations that he couldn't escape. They presented character witness, family members, childhood friends, and former collaborators who described Melly as a kind-hearted, hard-working individual who wouldn't harm those he considered family. Melly's mother, Jaime King, returned to the stand. Tears streamed down her faces. She spoke about the toll the trial had taken on her son. He's not perfect, she said, her voice trembling, but he's not a monster. I know my son. He loved those boys. They were like brothers to him. This whole thing has been a nightmare for our family. Her testimony resonated, with the jury adding a layer of humanity to the case that had been focused on forensic evidence and legal arguments. As the defense concluded their closing argument, they addressed the jury directly. You've seen the evidence, the attorney said. You've heard the testimonies. You felt the weight of thesis. We ask you to consider not just the facts, but the lack of concrete proof. We ask you to think about the consequence of convicting someone when there's reasonable doubt. And we urge you to remember that justice is not about assumptions or accusations. It's about truth. The prosecution, however, wasn't about to let the defense's arguments gauntlined. In their final rebuttal, they re-emphasized the text messages and the timeline they had painstakingly contrasted. Ladies and gentlemen, the lead prosecutor said, well, may not have handed you a confession on a silver platter, but his actions, his messages, honest behavior tell a story of betrayal, greed, and violence. The defense wants you to believe this is all one big misunderstanding, but we have shown youth trail of evidence that points directly to the defendant. They reminded the jury of the motive they had outlined from the beginning: financial disputes and internal conflict within the YNW group. This wasn't just a tragic accident, the prosecutor argued. It was a premeditated act, and the defendant's own words, his own texts, reveal a man who knew exactly what he was doing. The prosecution also doubled down on their portrayal of the crime scene. They played animations and diagrams for the jury showing how the bullets aligned with their theory. They argued that Melly's movements, as captured by GPS data, place him at the scene at the exact moment the crime occurred. You've seen the patterns, prosecutor concluded. You've seen how the pieces fit together. The unreasonable conclusion is that the defendant is guilty. With both sides having presented their final arguments, jury was sent off to deliberate. Their room was silent as they exited, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion, and determination. Spectators whispered among themselves, reporters jotted down notes, and the judge adjourned the court until the verdict was reached. As the day turned into night, the courthouse remained a hub of activity. News fans lined the streets, cameras flashed, and social media buzzed with speculation. What would the jury decide? Would they find Melly guilty of all charges, or would the defense's efforts to cast out be enough to sway them? Finally, after hours of devastating deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom. Everyone held their breath as the judge called the court back into session. Melly sat quietly, his hands folded, his face unreadable. The juror rose to speak, the paper trembling slightly in their hands. The judge asked, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" And at that moment, the entire courtroom leaned in the tension. So you could cut it with a knife, and there I'll have it, everything you need to know about YNW Melly's shocking courtroom revelations. But this is just the tip-off the iceberg. The trial is far from over. The implications of what we've uncovered today will undoubtedly ripple through the music industry, the legal system, and the public's perception of rap's most controversial figures. What do you think? Is this the breakthrough Melly needed to turn the tide? Or is it another chapter in a story filled with more questions than answers? Do you believe the defense's argument hold water? Or do the prosecution's claims feel airtight? Sound off in the comments and let us know your thoughts here. Voice matters in shaping the conversation. If you want to stay updated in every twist and turn, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're following this case closely, and we'll bring you the latest details as soon as they come in. Don't forget to like this video if you found it informative and share it with friends who are following this story just as closely as you are. Thanks for watching. Till next time, stay tuned for more breaking news and in-depth coverage.